Now, I am delighted to introduce and welcome our keynote speaker to today's symposium. Dr. Sabrina Paganoni received her medical degree from the University of Milan, followed by her doctorate in neuroscience here at Northwestern. Having received her residency and fellowships at Spaulding Rehabilitation Hospital, Brigham and Women's Hospital, and Massachusetts General Hospital, all of which are part of Harvard Medical School, she is board certified in physical medicine and rehabilitation, neuromuscular medicine, and electrodiagnostic medicine. Currently, Dr. Paganoni is an assistant professor at Harvard Medical School and a physician scientist at the Healey Center for ALS at Massachusetts General Hospital and at Spaulding Rehabilitation Hospital. She has published more than 75 peer-reviewed papers and serves as an editorial board member for Muscle and Nerve and the American Journal of PM&R. Her research has been funded by the NIH, foundations, and industry, and she has received several national awards for her work. Dr. Paganoni's research focuses on developing new treatments for ALS. She designed and is currently leading several ALS clinical trials that include novel endpoints and biomarkers, as well as innovative trial design. One of those is the groundbreaking Centaur study, sponsored by Amylyx, that has just announced the results of its phase 2/3 trial. I am sure she will have more to say about this trial on our clinical panel after her presentation, so please stay tuned. Her topic today is the HEALEY ALS Platform Trial, on which she is co-principal investigator. This innovative trial, the first platform trial for ALS in the world, is currently enrolling at our Lois and Solia ALS Clinic and is the first location in the Chicago area. We are very grateful Dr. Paganoni has joined us today. We are pleased to welcome her back to Chicago, at least virtually. And I'm very happy now to introduce Dr. Sabrina Paganoni.
Thank you for the kind introduction. It's always wonderful for me to present about the research we're doing. And I'm especially excited to present to people in Chicago. When I moved from Italy, Chicago was my first home in the US. I received my PhD, I guess, one block from your clinic. And it's really a pleasure for me. I actually go back with my family at least once a year. So I hope to be back in person as soon as possible because I really, Northwestern and the ALS clinic there really has a special place in my heart. And I'm also incredibly impressed with the work that you do, both in basic science, clinical research, clinical trials, and of course the wonderful work of the Les Turner Foundation for people in the Chicago area. So thank you for the nice welcome. I'm gonna share my screen. I hope that you can see it. And again, as you said, I moved to Boston, a few years ago, where I completed my clinical training, and now I work at the Healey Center for ALS and Mass General. I'm the co-principal investigator of the HEALEY ALS Platform Trial, which is the main topic of today's talk. But I also want to present some data from the Centaur trial, as that was recently concluded, and I think it's really exciting work that's going on in the field and could really have a significant impact for clinical care for everyone affected by ALS in the very near future. So I'm going to sort of present a little bit of both, focusing mostly on the platform trial, but also giving you some results from the Centaur trial. And I guess that the message for today's talk is that 2020 has been a remarkable year for ALS research. Obviously, there's other things that have been going on in the world in 2020, but one thing is definitely positive, and that's the progress in ALS. And hopefully, we will find new treatments soon. And a lot of the work that has been going on, despite the pandemic in 2020, is really planting the seed for many new innovations and changes really for people with ALS. So the one thing that we have at this point is a multitude of targets for intervention. You just had a phenomenal morning with lots of basic science and research updates. And I'm sure that you have all seen the exciting research that goes on both at Northwestern and elsewhere that's really highlighting a lot of targets for intervention. All that research is not just an academic endeavor or just for papers and books. It's really something that can have a real impact for people, because when we identify targets for intervention, we can then develop drugs to target those mechanisms. In fact, ALS is the neuromuscular disease with the largest drug development pipeline. So even compared to muscular dystrophy and many other neuromuscular diseases, we know that we have a very large number of drugs in the development pipeline. And that's important because the more drugs we test, the more chances we have of developing new effective treatments. And again, all of that starts from basic science, as you've seen today. Lots of great progress. And now my job as a clinical trial specialist is to translate all of these great discoveries into potential tools for intervention. And we want to test them well, test them efficiently and rapidly so that we can develop new treatments. So I just wanted to give like an overview of the trials that are going on around the world. This is not an exhaustive list. I'm only listing the phase 2 to 3 trials that are going on in the world and especially in the US. The ones that are underlined are the ones that are in phase 3 and that we expect results from either later this year or in 2021 or the following years. And essentially these are late stage trials where we're trying to learn the efficacy of these particular compounds. And specifically, as you know, there's been progress in gene therapy and antisense oligonucleotide techniques. There's a stem cell trial that's reading out at the end of the year. That's the Brainstorm trial. There's the arimoclomol trial that's reading out, that's providing results in early 2021, and many other trials in the phase 3 arena. So I know based on the questions that were sent ahead of the talk today, I know many of you have questions about some of these trials, and we can discuss that in more detail later. But I just want to provide the message that there are many trials that are going on around the world, including some advanced trials in phase 3. And so we really look forward to the results of all these trials to see if these drugs can be effective. Now, at Mass General, a couple of years ago, we started to plan a new adventure in the field of ALS, the HEALEY ALS Platform Trial. This is the first platform trial for ALS in the world. And what we are doing is what we did was to create a platform so that we could test many drugs as quickly as possible. So we brought together the entire ALS community with lots of input from people in academia, industry, foundations, the patient community, to really try to design something that could be transformative at this specific time in history. I told you before, there's many new targets for intervention, there's many new drugs in development, and also some separate trials, which is great. Many people around the world are doing this work, but we wanted to create something new in the US, starting in the US, to test as many targets, as many drugs as possible quickly so that we could provide new interventions as rapidly as possible. So again, we designed the HEALEY ALS Platform Trial to accelerate the development of new treatments for ALS, because we learned from our colleagues in cancer that if you use a platform approach as opposed to a traditional approach, you can actually cut down the time it takes to discover effective treatments by over 50%. And that's why we decided to start this trial. We just launched in the summer of 2020 at several centers in the US, including Northwestern University. So in a nutshell, that's how it works. So traditionally, whenever we test one treatment for ALS, keep in mind we have many in the pipeline, as I said earlier, traditionally we test them one treatment at a time. This means that we have to create an entire infrastructure just to test one drug and then to answer that particular question. So it means we spend 2 or 3 years building a whole infrastructure to test the one treatment, and then we'll know at the end of the trial whether the one treatment works or not. If it's negative, or in any case, we dismantle the infrastructure and then we move on to the next treatment. Now, with a platform trial, we built an open infrastructure that's going to do something dramatically different, which is to test multiple treatments in the same infrastructure, all at the same time. And we can add more as new treatments are developed. So what that allows us to do is to test many drugs in parallel which obviously it's common sense that's gonna increase the speed of development. Just because we can test more drugs, we can leverage the same infrastructure. I'm gonna tell you a little bit more later about some other specific features of the infrastructure, but essentially we can dramatically speed up the process of testing drugs for people with ALS. I also want to thank all the people that have been contributing to this effort from the beginning. We have a dedicated trial design committee that includes investigators listed at the top of the slide, as well as consultants from both MGH and Berry Consultants. Berry Consultants is a company, is a statistical consulting firm of statisticians that have designed the majority of platform trials that are ongoing in the US for cancer. And so we wanted to really partner with people that had a lot of experience with platform trials, even if it's in a different area of medicine, to be able to leverage everything good that the platform trials have done for cancer. And so we brought them in to be able to set up and then execute the platform trial, again, in a very efficient way, because we were learning from other fields that really did that successfully already. I also want to thank an advisory panel of many investigators from the NEALS consortium, which is a consortium of academic centers that specialize in ALS, both clinical care and research, including Northwestern, and especially I want to thank Dr. Senda Dries, who provided input into the design of the trial. So again, it's been a great collaborative experience, really getting input from so many in the community on all the experts that were interested in volunteering for this project so that we could design it the right way from the beginning. And we are running the trial thanks to a dedicated and experienced clinical operations team. That's a team that includes data managers, statisticians, monitoring experts, etc., from both the Massachusetts General Hospital as well as the Barrow Neurological Institute. This is the team that has been supporting the operations of the NEALS consortium, which is a consortium of ALS centers, as I said, that really specializes in clinical trials. So we're really leveraging experienced staff that has run other trials before to really create something new, something that could be more efficient and could give us, high quality data and give us help us answer many questions in a timely manner. Now, we also partnered with so many other people in the community, and I want to start by emphasizing the amazing input that we have been receiving from patients all along the way. We have a phenomenal patient advisory committee that includes patients from different cities, different states, people who have connected with research through different ways. We have representatives from IMALS, people who have been volunteering for other advocacy groups. We have people who graduated from the Research Ambassadors Program of the NEALS Consortium. Again, many people, caregivers and patients who really have been providing input from the beginning. Their input has been absolutely critical in informing the design of the trial, and they continue to help us. We meet on a regular basis to execute the trial and try to make it as patient-friendly as possible. In fact, we are the only trial that has received 5 stars from the patient-centric trial design rating system of IMALS, and we're very grateful for that. Again, we learned a lot from patients. We continue to do so, and we want to continue to partner with them to make the trial accessible and a good experience for the participants. Now, we also connected with investigators and sites, as I previously said, and also with industry partners and the FDA to design something that would, a trial that would respond to the needs of multiple stakeholders in the ALS space. So specifically, we selected 54 trial sites from the NEALS Consortium. This is, again, a network of sites and ALS clinics that have experience with ALS research and ALS clinical trials. That includes Northwestern University, as well as the University of Chicago and other sites in the Midwest, and as well as elsewhere, essentially throughout the entire country. And so we have these 54 sites. Many of those, over 50% of those, are now active for enrollment and are enrolling participants for this trial, and I will describe that in a few minutes. We also partnered with a very experienced therapy evaluation committee, scientists who really made landmark discoveries for ALS throughout the years, and they're helping us select the drugs to test in this trial. So the platform trial, in a way, is a concept, is an infrastructure, and then what we need to do is to select the best drugs to be tested in the trial. The trial can continue to accommodate more and more drugs to be tested. So what the therapy evaluation committee is doing is to review the science and readiness for the trial of a number of compounds, a number of molecules that are in development, and then rank the proposals according to the different levels of recommendation, with the goal of adding new companies and new treatments every year. Initially, we had a request for calls for applications, and we received a really phenomenal interest from industry. We selected the first few drugs, and I will explain which ones we have now in the platform. But we continue to add more drugs and review more therapies for inclusion. In fact, we are already working on the ones for 2021. Throughout all of this, we've been partnering with the FDA. We had a series of positive meetings. We had 2 in-person meetings in 2019 and 1 virtual meeting, unfortunately, because of the pandemic in 2020. So essentially what we did is that we partnered with the FDA from the beginning to design a trial that would really be able to answer the questions that we wanted to answer, and specifically, as agreed upon with the FDA, if a drug tested in the platform trial has very promising results, this one trial could serve as the registration or the pivotal trial for that particular compound. In other words, we're not talking of an early phase trial. The HEALEY ALS Platform Trial can really help develop new drugs that can be rapidly brought to market if the results are positive. Obviously, first we need to test the drugs, but if the results are positive, the way the trial is designed, the infrastructure, the fact that we're getting such high quality data, all of this is going to be instrumental in bringing new treatments to market if they have positive results in the context of this trial. So we submitted our initial request in December 2019 with the first 3 drugs. We received the May Proceed letter in January. We were gonna start enrolling in March, but because of the pandemic, we actually that was delayed to July because many clinics were essentially closed or had to move to remote, and many hospitals didn't allow researchers to enroll participants in research because sort of the priority for many hospitals shifted in the spring to COVID care, as obviously everyone knows. And so now we are rebooting, and unfortunately many centers, many sites were able to start enrolling participants in July. Some are still a little bit behind because, again, as you know, COVID had a different impact geographically depending on the area. So depending on that, some centers like Northwestern are enrolling and others might be behind. But again, we hope to open all of them very soon. We also already added the 4th drug. As I told you before, the reason for really building this optimized and open infrastructure was to be able to accommodate all the drugs that we think are important to test. And so we started with 3. We added the 4th, and we are about to start enrolling for the 4th. So again, it was added in terms of administrative steps. We're about to start enrolling really any time now. And then we continue to evaluate new treatments for inclusion in 2021. So again, we started with 3 treatments, regimens A, B, and C. The names of these are zilucoplan, verdiperstat, and CNM-Au8. And we just added regimen D, called pridopidine. Each drug has a different mechanism of action and a different route of administration. They're all made by different industry partners. So we partner with them, again, to test and really bring to trial drugs that we think are very promising. Some of them work on neuroinflammation, such as zilucoplan and verdiperstat. CNM-Au8 works on energy production, and pridopidine is an agonist of something called the sigma-1 receptor that's involved in neurodegeneration. So essentially, we're testing multiple drugs in parallel, and we will continue to add more. Now, that's why this is a perpetual trial and adaptive, because we will continue to add drugs and continue to learn from the trial itself. Now, because we are testing these 4 drugs within the same umbrella or in the same infrastructure, and we share all of the processes and mechanisms for testing the drugs, as well as the main protocol. In the platform trial, we can do something that would not be possible in a traditional trial. So as many of you know, when we test each drug one at a time, that's the traditional way of testing drug individually or separately, most of the times we have a placebo component and participants are randomized or randomly assigned to active or placebo 1-to-1. Essentially, you have a 50% chance of being on active or placebo. Now, in the platform approach, because we are sharing the same infrastructure, we can dramatically reduce the chances of being on placebo. So the randomization ratio is 3-to-1 in favor of active, meaning that for 4 people who enter the trial, 3 will be given the actual drug, and only 1, or 25%, will be given placebo. Essentially, what happens is that we are testing all of these drugs in parallel. Most people will be on the active drug. Only few people will be on placebo for each arm. And then the placebo data can be shared across different regimens or different arms. And so essentially then you can still make meaningful comparisons between the active, each individual active drug and the shared placebo. So for example, for zilucoplan, the first one at the top, the randomization ratio is 3-to-1. More people get zilucoplan than placebo, but then the placebo data gets shared with the placebo data from the other regimens. And so at the end of the trial, we can compare zilucoplan to a large enough shared placebo pool, and that will allow us to answer the question. At the same time, we can have a patient-centric approach and really minimize the number of people on placebo as much as possible. I also want to mention that the placebo control period lasts 24 weeks or 6 months, but then at the end of the placebo control period, so after completing 6 months on treatment, active or placebo, participants are given the option to enter what we call an open label extension. So what that means is that after 6 months on active or placebo, people who choose to do so after completing 6 months of treatment, they can go on an open label extension, which means getting the active drug for sure. Now, for example, people who are on the top one, zilucoplan, the orange one, at the end of 6 months, they will be able to enter the open label extension, receiving active zilucoplan. Now, the people who are in the green arm, verdiperstat, after 6 months on verdiperstat or placebo, they'll be able to receive active verdiperstat and so forth. So everyone continues in that regimen. And the open label extension is actually very important. So in addition to being a patient-centric design, because we give people the option of receiving active drug, this is also very important scientifically. The reason this is important is because by allowing a long-term open label extension, in addition to allowing access to the active drug, we can also study the drug long-term. We can study the safety long-term. We can study the efficacy long-term. So that's also very important to be able to get more information about the drug itself and support the development of that particular drug. A quick enrollment update. We have phenomenal enrollment numbers, several participants per month per site. Again, only 29 sites are enrolling for now, but just because of some of the COVID delays, we're really working as hard as possible to bring all the other sites on board soon. As of right now, 180 individuals with ALS signed informed consent. That's the first step to begin the process of being in the trial. And 128 have been assigned to a regimen. And really, we have not seen this level of patient interest since the 90s. And I think it's because of the great engagement of the patient community and the fact that we had such great input from the patient community to design a trial that people really want to be in. And so we really thank all the participants, all the families, caregivers, everyone who's involved, and all the site staff really that's working to support this really high level of enrollment. Now, I just want to give you a little bit more information about the trial itself. So each drug is tested according to a master protocol. So the treatment period is 24 weeks or about 6 months. For every drug, we're going to include 160 participants total. And of these, because the randomization is 3-to-1, for each drug, we're going to have 120 participants on active drug, and then 40 participants on placebo. And keep in mind that at the end of the treatment period, then there's going to be the open label extension that I mentioned earlier. So for every drug, we're going to include 160 participants. I also want to keep in mind that essentially because we continue to add new drugs, we don't anticipate ever running out of spots. So people who want to participate and are eligible to participate will be able to participate because we will continue to add drugs, and in a way we will continue to increase the pool of spots available. This is the target population that we're gonna test. People obviously need to have ALS in order to be included. People can take riluzole and edaravone as long as they are on a stable dose. Now, we do have some cutoffs in terms of time since onset of weakness and vital capacity and ability to swallow. Specifically, the time since onset of weakness needs to be less than 3 years, and the vital capacity needs to be at least 50% of predicted, and people need to be able to swallow the medication. Now, I do want to say that obviously because of these criteria, we are unable to include everyone. That's unfortunate, but that's needed because of the need to be able to test the drug in a relatively short period of time. In other words, by using these criteria, these criteria were selected based on intense discussions and a lot of statistical modeling based on results from previous trials. And by using these criteria, we had the best shot at being able to answer the question of whether each of these drugs works in a relatively short period of time with a relatively compact study. If we were to extend these criteria, for example, time since onset of weakness to 4 or 5 years, or no restrictions in terms of vital capacity or ability to swallow, the trial would need to be much larger and much longer, which means that it would take us longer to run it. And so it will, for the entire community, it would take longer to get the answer. So while this is, unfortunate that we cannot enroll everyone, we are, that's needed because of the need to expedite the development of new drugs. And then if a drug is positive and works, then we expect the results to apply to everyone, not just the people who are eligible for the trial. I also do want to say that we understand the need of access to research. And for this reason, we are working on expanded access protocols, which I will discuss later, that don't have these restrictions on inclusion. For the platform trial, we are collecting a number of outcomes that are listed on the slide. In addition to function, survival, respiratory function, and muscle strength, we are collecting a number of biomarkers. And I just want to spend a minute talking about the importance of the trial in terms of its ability to really collect novel biomarkers and exploratory endpoints that I'm going to list on the next slide. So we are collecting DNA, a lot of biosamples to measure different biomarkers, including neurofilaments. And we're also using smartphone devices to collect speech recordings and do speech analysis, as well as collecting vital capacity from home. The reason we're doing all of this is because in addition to testing the drugs, so the 4 drugs that are in the trial right now and the many more that we will continue to add, is that we want to learn from the trial. We want to learn new things. We want to help science. We want to really develop new insights into the genetics of ALS, into neurofilaments and other biomarkers, and into smartphone applications for remote monitoring of people in their home environment. Because ultimately, by learning about these new tools, we will be able to adapt the trial. Remember, the trial is a perpetual adaptive trial, to make it even better in the future, and also to contribute biosamples and knowledge to the entire field of ALS. And people will be able to request biosamples and do other analysis so that they can also improve their own studies and their own trials. So again, this is meant to be a collaborative project where, in addition to testing the drugs, we're also contributing to the community. In order to find a center near you, if you're not in Chicago, please refer to our website. Again, 29 sites are enrolling, and the goal is to activate the other sites and also add more. We're going to select more sites for some geographies that are not as well represented right now, and to increase capacity in larger cities. So again, we have a good list of sites for now, and we will continue to add them. These are the sites that are enrolling, including Northwestern and the University of Chicago. And if you have any questions, please feel free to call our patient navigator. In addition to the staff at your clinic, we also have a central resource. Catherine and Allison answer the phone and the email on the slide for additional information should you have additional questions about the trial. We also send out a number of platform trial updates via our ALS Link newsletter. And something that I wanted to share is that we're now doing weekly webinars. The idea came from our patient advisory committee, and we will continue to update the community. Obviously, it's great for me to update you today. And then if you want to follow the numbers and follow the progress on a weekly basis, please feel free to also check our website. Check out our website, and where we also post the registration links, the slide decks, and the recordings of previous webinars. And also, we are going to work with our industry partners on developing dedicated webinars over the next few weeks that each will explain the mechanism of action and the science behind each of the drugs that are currently in the trial, so that you can ask more information and then really be able to ask questions directly. Ask to the scientists who developed the 4 drugs that are in the trial. So, so take a look at our website, and we don't have those webinars scheduled yet, but they're coming up very soon. And so, if you have additional questions about the science and want to talk to the scientists who develop the drugs at the respective companies, again, there will be the opportunity over the next few weeks. I wanted to say a couple of words about our plans for an expanded access program. So again, the idea is one of those other phenomenal ideas that came from our patients, from the patient advisory committee. The goal is to build a program in parallel to the platform trial for allowing access to the drugs to patients who are not eligible for the trial. As I said earlier, we really try to maximize access, but in order to be able to answer the scientific question and test the efficacy of the drug in a time-effective manner, we had to restrict access to only people who had certain criteria. Now, those criteria are broader, I should say, than the vast majority of other trials. However, we do recognize that some people might not be eligible, nevertheless. So we are working to build this expanded access program. It's going to take some time. I just want to have that to say that, because we're basically fundraising. We submitted 1 grant. We're working on the next steps, and we will update the community. This does take work, and so we are definitely committed to this, and we will open these programs over the next few months, I think in 2021. But again, please stay in touch, and we will certainly share updates about this program as well. Now, I just wanted to quickly review the results of the center trial now, kind of switching gears. I think, again, as I said earlier, 2020 has been an extraordinary year, and for ALS in a good sense in terms of the research and all the research discoveries, progress with familial ALS trials, progress with other trials that I'm not directly involved with, as well as progress with the platform trial and the center trial. So I just wanted to briefly review the results because I know based on the questions that were sent ahead of time, I think that, there might be questions about that as well. So I just wanted to take an opportunity maybe over the next 10 minutes or so to share results related to function, safety, and survival so that you're up to date on where we stand with this particular trial. And I want to acknowledge Dr. Mary Sukovich, my scientific mentor and the senior author of the trial. In fact, Mary is the person who discussed this trial initially in 2015. Amylyx Pharmaceuticals had developed the concept between 2013 and 2015. Actually, as you may have read, they developed the concept for this drug for AMX35 while they were still students at Brown University. And then they met with Merit, as well as our colleagues at MGH, Dr. Rudy Tanzi and others, who basically discussed their plans, looked more into the science. And then Dr. Sukovich was the one who basically suggested that they also entertain ALS as a therapeutic target. Initially, Amylyx Pharmaceuticals was going to focus on Alzheimer's, and they still are working on Alzheimer's disease, which is great. But it was Dr. Sukovich who discussed the possibility of trying the drug for ALS as well. And because of her suggestion, in 2015, together we designed the trial, applied for a grant. We had an initial funding from ALS Finding a Cure, as well as the ALS Association. And that was sort of a catalyst to start the trial. And then obviously Amylyx is the sponsor and continue the development of this drug. But it was wonderful to really conceive the trial from the beginning as a collaboration between industry and academia. And I think it's really a great example of how the field of ALS is open and receptive to new ideas. Even people who come from different fields of medicine, again, this came from Alzheimer's, but really the idea was to really look into all possibilities for ALS. And so I'm so glad that that happened, and I'm so glad I got connected with Amylyx as well. And so we started the trial in 2017, and we ended it in 2020 with 2 papers that were just reported. So I just wanted to briefly share the results, as it might have significant implications for ALS care in the near future. So again, it was a wonderful collaboration in the ALS community. We enrolled at 25 sites. And AMX35, which is the compound that was tested in this trial, is a combination of the compounds PB and TERSO. They target different cell components. As I told you before, there's many targets for intervention. So it's important that we really explore all the targets. And PB and TERSO target different components of the cell. Individually, they have shown neuroprotective properties in lab models, sort of the same types of research you've seen this morning, where different drugs are tested in the lab. And then Amylyx Pharmaceuticals combined the two and found that the combination of the two was even better at stopping neurodegeneration in the lab. So we were excited to partner with them to see if the combination of the two will be powerful and effective not only in the lab, but also in people. The drug is taken by mouth or feeding tube. It comes as a powder. It's taken once a day for 3 weeks and then twice a day. It can have a bitter taste, so the placebo was matched for appearance and taste. And so with this knowledge, we started the CENTAR trial, which is a trial of a combination of phenylbutyrate and tersodiol, or TERSO. And we published the results very recently in September and October, respectively. The first paper was published in the New England Journal of Medicine and focused on physical function. And the second paper was published in the journal Muscle and Nerve, focusing on the effects of this drug on survival. And I actually gave detailed webinars about this, and they are available, the recordings are available on the NEALS website if you're interested. But for today, I just wanted to kind of summarize the main take-home points. So the trial was made possible thanks to the efforts of 137 people with ALS who enrolled in the study about 1 year after their first symptom, or about 6 months after their diagnosis. About a quarter of them had bulbar onset, and the vast majority of participants were already taking riluzole, edaravone, or both. So the results I'm going to share today, they're not compared to riluzole or edaravone. They are on top of riluzole and edaravone because we allowed participants to take standard of care medications, basically riluzole and edaravone, which are approved by the FDA for ALS. And so we wanted to see in the trial if AMX35 would provide additional effects, additional beneficial effects on top of standard of care. So again, we wanted to test the effect of the drug on physical function, on survival, and also obviously we wanted to confirm that the drug is safe and tolerable. In order to do so, we designed a randomized trial, and sort of similar to the platform trial, this trial included a randomized period, a first period of 6 months, where we randomly assigned participants to either active or placebo in a 2-to-1 ratio. So the AMX35 group was twice as big as the placebo group. And we measured carefully their function and safety, and the safety of the drug over a 6-month period. But then after 6 months, we allowed participants the option to receive AMX35 if they so chose. And then we measured survival of all participants over a long period of time. In order to measure for, physical function in ALS, we used something called the ALS FRSR. This is a questionnaire of 12 questions that basically allows us to measure independence with different activities. So for example, we measure speech or handwriting or the ability to turn in bed or walk or the use of devices for respiration. And so we assign a score to each of the 12 questions. And the scale is from 0, which means function absent, to 4, which means function normal. And so the score basically goes to 0 to 48, where 48 is the maximum score and means normal function. So we measured this over a 6-month period to see if the drug had an effect on retention of physical function. So we were hoping to see that people on the drug would be able to retain physical function for longer than people on placebo over a 6-month period. And that's exactly what we saw. So the people who took AMX35 are labeled in red at the top, and the people who took placebo over 6 months are labeled in blue at the bottom. And you can see here that there is a difference in the slope of the ALS-FRSR, which indicated a slowing of progression for people taking AMX35. Now, as you can see, both groups progressed. So the drug did not stop the disease and couldn't reverse it. However, it did significantly slow it down in a way that I think is clinically meaningful. In a way, we can express these results to say that participants who received AMX35 had the same ALS-FRSR total score after 6 months of treatment as those in the placebo group did at week 18. Essentially, they retained function longer. This is a 6-week increase in retained function measured over a 24-week period. In terms of absolute numbers, people who received AMX35 had a total ALS-FRSR score that was 2.32 points higher than people who received placebo. So again, that's a different way of expressing the same result. They were able to retain their physical functions for longer. In terms of safety, actually the drug was safe and well tolerated. And the only event that I would like to share is that a few people who received AMX35 had some gastrointestinal events, including nausea, diarrhea, and some stomach pain, especially during the first 3 weeks of treatment. And that's, again, a small number of individuals. Now, because we had positive effects on function and an overall benign safety profile, we wanted to see what happened to these participants long term. So I told you before that we enrolled 137 participants. We followed them initially for 6 months, but then we gave them the option to receive open label extension. But regardless of whether they enter the open label extension or not, we followed everyone's survival for up to 3 years. So we started enrolling participants in 2017, and then we checked everyone's survival of all the 137 participants in July of 2020. That's the data that we just published in Muscle and Nerve. So we compared participants who were originally randomized to AMX35, that's 89 of them, to participants who were originally randomized to placebo, 48 people. We used public records to determine whether they were alive as of July 20, 2020, meaning essentially 3 years after the beginning of the study. It was 35 months, just a week or so shy of 36 months or 3 years. And the results are pretty remarkable. So we saw that people who were originally randomized to AMX35 had a survival that was 6.5 months longer compared to people who were originally randomized to placebo. So again, we're talking of over 6 months or longer survival for people who started the drug early, because as a reminder, even people on placebo could then receive drugs after 6 months of placebo-controlled trial. So even the people who got some placebo, who were on placebo initially, got some drug at some point, but they started receiving it later. And so overall, the exposure to the drug was much larger in people who received AMX35 from the beginning compared to people who started 6 months later. I also want to mention that this survival effect is independent of baseline use of riluzole, edaravone, or both. In other words, again, we allowed participants to take standard of care medications, and so these results are not compared to riluzole or edaravone, they are on top of riluzole and edaravone. And this is my last slide. To summarize, in the CENTAR trial, administration of AMX35 resulted in both a functional benefit and a long-term survival benefit, specifically slowing of disease progression and longer survival, independent of standard of use of ALS medications. So again, to conclude, I think this has been a remarkable year for ALS, with lots of progress and many more new results to come in 2021. I think the pace of discovery and testing of these new drugs has really accelerated. And so I think we have some positive news in ALS in 2020 and hopefully many more news in 2021. So thank you for your attention, and I will be happy to take your questions.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Paganoni. I'm Colin France. I'm going to be doing my best to lead us to the remainder of the program here. We're going to do a couple of housekeeping points before we take questions. We have a few questions already coming in to the Q&A. I see another one popping up. I'll be reading those questions to Dr. Paganoni. And if you want to submit a new question, feel free to write it in the Q&A section. The chat section is available for us to communicate with you, and you'll see that some helpful things have already come through the chat from the panelists and from our organizers, including reminder for everyone to do the survey at any point you want to do that. The chat is also helpful, giving information about where to find clinical trial information, the Les Turner website, as well as the information from the platform trial and that Dr. Paganoni had in her slides. And remember that, if you missed anything today or if you want to see anything over again, everything's going to be on the YouTube channel. That was a question as well that we got in. So, and then we'll be finishing off after these questions. We're doing wonderful for time, actually. So we'll have lots of time for questions. And then depending on how we go along here, we were going to start the panel at 2:15, but we may even start it earlier. So we'll see how it goes. The first question I had, Dr. Paganoni, was, and I think you've sort of answered it, but maybe you could just reiterate this. Out of the patients that are being recruited, 120 patients for each drug and 40 patients for placebo. So could you just clarify that, because I believe that was 4 drugs, so it'd be 30 patients per drug, correct? And then 40 in the placebo. That's the current design for how you're enrolling in platform. And is there any patients who would get a combination of drugs and platform?
Yeah, these are great questions. No, there's no combination at this point other than the fact that people can take riluzole and edaravone. But each investigational product or experimental drug will be tested, against placebo. It's not a combination of investigational products. And for each drug in the platform trial, 120 people will receive active drug and 40 will receive placebo for each of them. And then the placebo data will be combined. So you have 40 people on placebo for regimen A, 40 people on placebo for regimen B, etc. And so then we have a large enough placebo group by combining people on placebo in the different arms.
Great. And then there was a question about how the drugs are going to be administered by pill, injection, infusion. Could you just comment on that for the ones that are currently in? I believe this is related to the platform trial as well. And also if there's any selection of patients to particular drugs based on their individual characteristics, or is it totally random?
Yeah, so for this first group of 4 drugs, we think that all the drugs are applicable to a broad ALS population. So there isn't any specific selection about, there's no specific reason to lead us to believe that one drug would work in some patients but not others, and therefore we don't have a selection based on mechanism. Now we have those inclusion-exclusion criteria that I discussed earlier, but not based on biological mechanism for now. It's possible that in the future, there might be drugs where we select by mechanism, but not currently. the 4 drugs that are in the trial are given via different routes of administration. Zilucoplan is a subcutaneous injection. Verdiperstat is a pill. CNM-Au8 is a drink. And predopidine is a pill. So again, a variety of options for the first 4 drugs.
And just to follow up on that, when it comes to placebo, do you have is the placebo group going to reflect those different modes of administration?
Correct. Yeah, so there is a matching placebo. So for example, for zilucoplan, we have 120 people on the active zilucoplan and 40 people on placebo for that regimen. Both people on active and placebo for that regimen will take subcutaneous injections.
I see.
Now, for regimen B, for example, which is the verdiperstat, which is a pill, we have 120 people taking the pill and then 40 people taking the placebo pill. And so that's how you get to 160 per regimen. So people on placebo will have different, will receive different compounds, basically, depending on, they're going to be matched to that particular regimen they're assigned to.
Excellent. And then the next question is, if in addition to the expanded access, which I believe you've already commented on, there was a question about if people don't qualify about getting access to these drugs on the basis of right to try.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So I just want to clarify that both right to try and expanded access are 2 methods for people to have access to active drug. Now, they do so, though, in a different way. So for expanded access, we're still under FDA oversight. And so we prefer that because we think it's a way to really give the drugs more safely and with oversight, which I think is important because these are still experimental drugs after all. So that's why we want to build an EAP or expanded access program in parallel to the platform trial. Now, we do have a few small expanded access programs at NGH that we started a couple of years ago when the Heli Center was founded, and we treated about 80 to 90 people so far. Those are small. Again, we're really working hard to fundraise and expand, and those are going to create a path for people who don't qualify for trials to have access to the drug. But again, they're small, and it's going to take a little bit of time to set them up.
Okay. And the next question is about AMX and its availability through expanded access, similar to the platform trial medications. And could you comment on that? And also a related question about, is it available now? And can you get, if you can't get the AMX combination medication, can you get them in their separate forms?
No, these are all good questions. So AMX 35 is a combination of 2 compounds. The drug that was tested in the trial that I just described is the proprietary combination that's optimized for absorption and again, dosing. That's the one that was tested. It's not available yet. There's a lot of active conversations for people with different regulatory groups, both in the US, that would be the FDA, as well as elsewhere, that would be Health Canada and the European Medicines Agency. So in the different territories, the company is having ongoing conversations, and the outcome of that will determine whether a new trial is needed, whether this could be expanded access. Again, all of this is still on the table. There's no final decision yet because all of that will depend on the review of all the documentations that's going to be provided to the agencies, and then they'll make their decision and recommendation in terms of what can be done, either a new trial, approval, expanded access, etc. Again, we don't have the answer yet.
Great. And I guess that the next question here sequentially, it looks like it is, if you get the request to prescribe the combination of those 2 medications, even as separate agents in clinic, is this something that is commonly being done in ALS clinics? And you could speak from your own experience or what you've heard from other clinics, because this is, again, it seems to be really front and center on our attendees' mind.
Yeah, so I don't know if this is common or not in ALS clinics. I know it's a commonly asked question because, again, the 2 compounds are available. However, the drug that was tested in the trial is the proprietary combination that's high quality pharmaceutical product. Now, as you may know, of the two compounds, one of the two, Terso or Tadca, is actually available as a supplement, but that's not regulated in terms of quality control. It's not pharmaceutical grade, so I cannot comment on whether the results will be the same or not. I actually don't know. I can only tell you what we tested. That's pharmaceutical grade compound. And so again, Terso is available through a variety of sources, but again, they're not necessarily pharmaceutical grade.
Thank you for clarifying. And then we're doing pretty good for time. I'm actually going to take a question from one of the panelists, and then I'll go back to the audience questions. So from Dr. Ozdinler, was wondering about, since patients are taking, many patients are on riluzole and or edaravone, is there a way to find out, either retrospectively or prospectively, I suppose, is whether or not the benefits seen of the AMX compound has something to do being used in combination with these other agents, or for example, would a patient need to take all three compounds to see these greater effects, or could the effect be attributed just to the AMX compound if it was a monotherapy?
No, this is a great question. I mean, from a purely scientific standpoint, the only way to really answer this question would be to do a new trial and assign people to all sorts of combinations and randomly assign them to all sorts of combinations. Now, because this was a human trial, not in the lab, we didn't think it would be ethical to ask participants not to take one of the available treatments, riluzole or edaravone or both, based on their choice. And so we allowed participants to take one or the other or both. And because of that, we cannot fully answer the question of whether, what's the actual, what's the effect of edaravone, for example, on survival or function, or riluzole alone, or would this be really a synergy or not? So what we did do was a series of sensitivity analysis, which means that we could test whether the primary analysis was sensitive to the use of background medications, and it wasn't. So what this means is that our primary question and primary result, which is whether AMX35 works or not in terms of function and survival, was not biased or was not confounded by the presence of background medication. So that's what the trial design allows us to state as of right now.
That's a great answer. Thank you very much. And I'll get back to the audience questions here. And was wondering if you did genetic testing for the patients enrolled in order to correlate that with the response to drugs. And I believe that is related to Centaur trial, but could you maybe comment about the use of genetic testing information and sort of post hoc analysis of either the platform trial or Centaur?
Yeah, no, I do think that it would be incredibly important for every trial to collect DNA information to do this type of analysis. So for Centaur, for the AMX35 trial, we did collect DNA on an optional basis. So we have DNA from a good group of participants, not from everyone, but from a large enough group. We are now in the process of doing the DNA analysis. That's going to be done at the lab in New York. And again, because of COVID and obviously the impact of that on New York City, that's a little bit delayed, but we're now doing it now. So we're going back to that. In terms of the platform trial, we are also collecting DNA on an optional basis. I would certainly encourage every participant to donate DNA, because I think these type of analyses are going to be incredibly important, because we might discover that perhaps in subgroups or specific genetic variants, there might be a specific effect of some of the drugs. So it's incredibly important to test that. And
maybe I could just build on that too, because one of the other things before we move on is ALS subtypes. And so could you comment a bit too about any plans for trying to connect, the responsiveness to medications we're matching like a clinical subtype, not just a genetic subtype?
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of the platform trial, for example, we're doing deep phenotyping and genotyping of all participants. So what this means is that we're really characterizing everyone's both genetic signatures as well as clinical presentation. Limb onset, bulbar onset, upper motor neuron predominant, etc. And so based on that, we will be able to test a few questions related to whether the effect of one drug or the other might be more significant in one subgroup or another, whether it's a genetic subgroup or a clinical presentation subgroup. Absolutely, these are things that need to be done. Yeah.
I think we're getting great questions, actually. These are better questions that I could have come up with in many cases. So, but this one, I think if I'm understanding from Peter Werner's question here, is some hypothetical examples of patients who wouldn't qualify based on the inclusion criteria for platform.
Yeah, so I would say
for expanded access. So, but for platform, maybe you could comment on some of the common inclusion criteria
right.
that where we have to think about that, because I know we think about that a lot clinically about who's going to meet that. And then also for expanded access, I think the question is, if you don't qualify for the platform trial, but you have the diagnosis of ALS, is there anything that would disqualify you from expanded access? Is if I'm understanding that correct? And that's a two-part.
Yeah, so essentially in terms of the platform trial, for example, I would say a common question is about the cutoff in terms of time since onset of weakness. So for example, if somebody has had the first symptom of weakness within, less than 3 years, they can qualify based on that criterion. But people who have had the disease for longer than 3 years could not enter the trial. And the reason for that is because people who have had the disease for longer than 3 years, by definition, they are slow progressors. And so what this means is that, the way their scores change over time, it doesn't change fast enough for us to be able to see a difference between active and placebo over the course of 6 months of placebo-controlled trial. So if we were to enroll people who have had the disease, for example, for 5 years, in order to be able to tell a difference over a 6-month period, remember, we want to keep the placebo-controlled period as short as possible. So if we were to include people who have had the disease for 5 or 6 years, then we would need a much larger trial and a longer trial to be able to see a treatment effect or a difference between the groups. So for example, that would be a reason why somebody who has had the disease for 5 years, for example, cannot get into the platform trial, but it could get into an expanded access program if that was available. Again, we're really working hard on setting that up. It's not available yet. We hope to open that in the near future. And to be honest with you, to be transparent, it's gonna take some time, and it's gonna be small groups of patients at each given time. So it's not gonna be a large program because it is very expensive anyway. Even if it's an expanded access, it's complex to run. But we're certainly interested and committed to starting that, and hopefully that will really create a paradigm shift in the field where more and more expanded access programs are created so that people who want to participate can participate. In terms of expanded access, it's very liberal in terms of inclusion criteria. There could still be some safety concerns for some of the participants. Some drugs might have, for example, some contraindications in people who have certain lab results, for example, and those would still be the case there if there's something that makes the drug unsafe in a specific group of people. But again, the criteria are certainly more relaxed than a randomized trial.
So, I'm seeing a couple comments, a comment and a question here related to the cost of the drugs, specifically about the cost of the AMX combination medication, but it raises the question to me in as well, and there's a comment about how the out-of-pocket cost might run if we just do off-label trying to prescribe the components of it. But bigger picture, because I feel like with the platform, there's now some additional leverage as ALS clinicians we have now for that companies and people who want to bring their drug to clinical trial want to participate in this, using this platform trial, using this mechanism that's been created that you've led and that the Healey Center has led and that we're part of. So I guess the question I'm going to sort of turn it into my own question is, what influence do we have for the companies that sign up to control the prices of the medications? Because we obviously have seen things be very expensive for new medications approved for ALS or SMA in the last number of years. So what control do we have to make sure that the prices are not such that it's out of reach for some of our patients?
That's a great question. I wish I had a good answer for it. I don't think that investigators have any control into this. It's a much bigger problem issue. I think that the way drug prices are set, and so again, unfortunately, I don't have any specific insights into that. I would sure hope that drugs are priced reasonably and that they are reimbursed by insurance.
Yeah, well, I think the amazing thing is getting the platform off the ground. So especially not just for what it could deliver in the next few years, but what it can keep delivering. But I think that might be something, just me providing a commentary, that comes up on the advisory committee level about future candidates, is whether or not there should be some sort of contract that they have to the ALS community about what they're going to do if they have success using this platform that has been created by the ALS community to advance drugs, with a lot of partners.
Right, that's a great question. I mean, obviously a lot goes into the development of each compound just to get there. We only include drugs that have a fair amount of science and early trial data behind them. So again, I cannot comment on the final price. Certainly we are creating a platform so that the last step can be efficient. So, and hopefully that will translate in better access if the product goes to market.
And there's also, how are we doing for time here? So, this is the last question here. We're going to go 1 minute over, but because I didn't want to ignore Wendy's question, is there any data on whether COVID has had an impact on the ALS population as far as survival outcomes and not, in addition to like kind of influencing how the drugs work, but how COVID is going to impact our clinical trial outcomes and our patients?
No, that's a great question. So we were having that discussion with a few other colleagues recently about sort of data on the effect of COVID on the ALS population. Now, there's been a few publications about the fact that certainly COVID has disrupted delivery of care. As many of you may know, there's a national shortage of home nurses. It's hard to get home PT. It's hard to get some services. Some clinics had to go on virtual mode for a while. So obviously the fact that some services are sort of more difficult to set up is in itself, and that does have an impact on care. In terms of, does COVID directly affect people with ALS in a disproportionate way? Again, there's no data. We were just, again, talking with some colleagues the other day. We're not aware of any systematic way of capturing the data in the US. I know that in Italy, for example, they've done some research initially, and they were actually surprised by the fact that there were very few cases of COVID among ALS patients, and that's been seen by other colleagues anecdotally. Perhaps that's also because, especially some people might have been more sort of vigilant, knowing the ALS diagnosis and being, starting kind of with social distancing early on. So that could be one of the reasons why maybe we haven't seen as many cases among people with ALS. But again, that's just speculation at this point. I don't think there's any data to really back this up. Anecdotally, with many colleagues, we've been talking about how few cases we've seen in our population. But again, that might be because people take a lot of precautions because they're concerned about the effects.